Arab merchants had a saying about this island. If all the world were a golden ring, Hormuz would be the jewel in it. The rock sat in the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow passage between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, near where the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas stands today, at the meeting point of two seas. Hormuz itself was a barren salt rock, with no fresh water and no fields to farm. Every drop to drink, every grain of food, and every good sold in its markets had to arrive by ship from somewhere else. The island produced nothing on its own, merely commanded the routes that carried everything. Yet by the 15th century, Hormuz ranked among the wealthiest port cities in the Middle East. Chinese Admiral Genghis' treasure fleets called at its harbor during their great voyages, trading silk and porcelain for pearls, horses, and spices. Rock with no water had become a magnet for empires. That wealth came from position alone, not soil or mines. Nearly every ship carrying goods between India, East Africa, and the Persian Gulf passed within sight of Hormuz's harbor. Merchants paid a toll to cross, and the island grew rich on tariffs, without planting a seed or digging a well. In the summer of 1507, 6 small, weathered ships appeared on the horizon. They carried fewer than 500 men, sent by a kingdom called Portugal, a name few traders in Hormuz's markets had ever heard. The jewel in the golden ring was about to change hands. Long before Portugal ever sailed into the Gulf, the Kingdom of Hormuz already ruled its waters. Muhammad Diramku, an Arab emigrant from Oman, founded the dynasty in the 11th century. He built his first capital on the Persian mainland, near the site of modern Minab. Around 1301, the ruling dynasty made a decisive move. They abandoned the mainland for the island of Jerun, a rocky outpost far easier to defend. The island took the name of the kingdom itself, becoming Hormuz, later rendered by Europeans as Hormuz. From that island seat, Hormuz's reach grew far beyond its own shores. Its authority ran along both coasts of the Gulf, stretching west as far as Bahrain. Every ship trading through these waters paid a fixed annual toll to the kingdom, whether it liked it or not. Life on the island reflected the trade that sustained it. Persian, Arab, and Indian communities all lived and worked within its walls. Persian remained the common tongue of the streets and markets, even though the royal family itself traced its bloodline back to Arabia. Portuguese officials, who later studied the kingdom's finances, left behind striking figures. They estimated Hormuz's total annual income at around 140,000 gold cruzados. Of that sum, roughly 100,000 cruzados came from customs duties alone, collected from merchants passing through its harbor. That wealth moved on the back of real tools and real ships. Navigators plotted their courses with instruments like the astrolabe, while sturdy dhows known as bagalas carried the cargo. Those ships and instruments carried spices, pearls, silk, and horses across the trade routes that Hormuz taxed. By the time any European fleet reached the Indian Ocean, Hormuz was no newcomer to power. The kingdom had already ruled as the Gulf's dominant trading force for roughly 2 centuries. Its toll booth had been open and profitable long before Lisbon ever took notice. Afonso de Albuquerque was born around 1453 near Lisbon. He had already fought in Portugal's campaigns across North Africa and served in the fleets patrolling India's coast. By the time King Manuel I needed a commander for the Persian Gulf, Albuquerque was a battle-tested veteran already in his 50s. King Manuel I had a grand strategy for reshaping world trade: choke the flow of Muslim commerce by seizing its choke points one by one. 3 ports topped his list: Hormuz, Aden, and Malacca. Whoever held these gates could redirect the spice trade around Africa straight to Lisbon's docks. In 1506, Albuquerque sailed from Lisbon as part of Tristão da Cunha's Great Armada, bound for the Indian Ocean, tasked with securing footholds along the way. By the summer of 1507, after helping capture the island of Socotra in the Arabian Sea, he split away with 6 ships and roughly 500 men, his own force now bound for the Gulf. Sailing along the Omani coast toward Hormuz, Albuquerque's small fleet struck first, taking towns by surprise before they could raise an alarm. One by one his men stormed and sacked, 3 towns, Qualhat, Curiat, and Muscat. Each fell before word of the attack could travel ahead. By September of 1507, only Hormuz itself remained in his path. Hormuz could field defenses that vastly dwarfed Albuquerque's tiny force. Contemporary accounts describe dozens of armed merchant ships crowding its harbor and thousands of troops garrisoning its shores. Against 6 vessels and 500 men, the island's rulers had every reason to feel untouchable behind their high stone walls. Albuquerque compensated with deception rather than numbers. He landed his soldiers in separate groups on different days, marching them past the same watching eyes again and again. To the fortifications above the harbor, it looked as though a far larger army had arrived to lay siege, a bluff that would shape everything that followed. In September 1507, Hormuz answered to a boy. King Saif ad-Din was only 15 years old, a child on an ancient throne. Real power sat with his vizier Cogiatar, a eunuch born in Bengal who ran the kingdom's affairs. It was Cogiatar, not the young king who would face Afonso de Albuquerque when Portuguese sails appeared in the harbor. Albuquerque announced why he had come. Hormuz would become a vassal of Portugal, its trade placed under Portuguese protection. Cogiatar refused the demand outright, unwilling to bow to 6 foreign ships. Within hours, fighting broke out across the harbor, Portuguese guns against the ships and shore batteries of Hormuz. Portuguese ships attacked the Hormuz fleet in the harbor during fighting. Cogiatar's forces could not hold their position. Envoys rode out shortly after to request peace. Negotiations continued for weeks. On the 10th of October, 1507, both sides signed terms that ended the kingdom's independence in all but name. The treaty's terms were clear and harsh. Hormuz would pay Portugal 15,000 gold ashrafis in tribute every year. Portuguese traders would not have to pay any customs duties at all, a move that cut the crown's revenue. And Portugal won the right to build a fortress on the island, a foothold that would outlast the treaty itself. Construction began on the 24th of October, 1507, barely 2 weeks after the treaty was signed. The new stronghold would become the fortress of Nossa Senhora da Conceição. But Albuquerque's own captains quarreled bitterly over strategy and resources. When he sailed away in February of 1508, the fortress walls stood only half finished. Saif ad-Din kept his throne and his royal court with its titles and ceremony intact. In practice, though, Hormuz now answered to Portugal in everything but name. Albuquerque would not come back to finish the conquest for another 8 years. Instead, he turned west and east, seizing Goa in 1510 and Malacca in 1511. In April of 1515, Afonso de Albuquerque sailed back to Hormuz with a larger fleet than the one that had first seized it 8 years before. This time, the occupation held for good. His engineers finished the stone fortress he had begun, closing out a project stalled for years by mutiny and delay. 8 months later, in December of 1515, Albuquerque died aboard his ship off the coast of Goa. He reportedly learned, while still at sea, that the Portuguese crown had already named his successor as governor of India. He is said to have died bitter, denied the credit for his own triumph. Portugal now ran the wider Indian Ocean trade through a document called the Cartas, a paid pass required of every merchant ship. Vessels caught sailing without one risk seizure by Portuguese patrols working the sea lanes. Cartas revenue became one of the biggest sources of income for the Estado da India, the Asian empire ruled by the crown. By 1524, Hormuz's customs house alone was reportedly earning around 200,000 cruzados a year for the Portuguese crown. Those tolls were tallied and administered from Goa, the colonial capital on India's western coast, seat of the viceroy who oversaw the whole Eastern Empire. Hormuz's own king stayed on their throne for generations, paying tribute and keeping the ceremonial trappings of rule. Real power belonged to a Portuguese captain garrisoned in the fortress, who answered not to the king, but to the viceroy in Goa. Sovereignty had become theatre, administration was Portuguese. Portugal used its foothold at Hormuz to reach further into the Gulf. and in 1521 a campaign launched from the island toppled the Jabrid rulers of Bahrain, seizing their pearl fisheries for the crown. The arrangement at Hormuz itself held for over a century, and from 1515 until 1522 the Strait functioned as a Portuguese-controlled waterway. By the early 1600s, Shah Abbas I of Persia was tired of a foreign toll post sitting astride his own coastline. The Safavid ruler wanted Hormuz's customs house back under Persian authority. He turned to his provincial commander, Imam Quli Khan, and authorized him to open talks with a rising power in the Gulf, England's East India Company, whose ships could do what Persia's own navy could not. The company agreed to lend its warships to the Safavid cause, but not out of charity. In exchange, English merchants wanted a foothold in Persia's lucrative silk trade, along with a share of whatever plunder and customs revenue fell out of Hormuz once the Portuguese garrison was gone. Trade concessions, not territory, drove the English calculation from the start. The joint Anglo-Persian campaign opened in January 1622, striking the smaller Portuguese post on nearby Keshma Island first. Among the English crews was William Baffin, the Arctic explorer turned naval pilot, brought south to help guide the assault. On the 23rd of January, gunfire from the island's defences struck him down. The main target was Hormuz fortress itself, held by roughly 1,000 Portuguese troops under the commander Simão de Melo. Facing them stood an Anglo-Persian force of about 3,000 men. The siege opened on the 9th of February 1622 and would grind on for more than 10 weeks before it was decided. English ships under Captain Blythe sealed off the harbour, denying any relief fleet the chance to reach the garrison from Portuguese Goa across the Arabian Sea. On land, Persian gunners kept up a steady bombardment, while sappers dug tunnels beneath the walls, working to bring the fortress down from underneath as well as from above. Cut off and running low on gunpowder and shot, the Portuguese garrison turned on its own officers. Soldiers mutinied on the 22nd of April. Hormuz was surrendered and occupied the following day, 23rd of April 1622, closing out 115 years of Portuguese rule over the island. The victors then settled accounts, since their partnership had always been a bargain struck on paper as much as on the battlefield. The Anglo-Persian agreement covered several points: a split of Hormuz's captured customs revenue between the two allies, a division of Portuguese prisoners taken in the fortress, reduced customs duties going forward for English ships trading in Persian ports, and a share in Persia's silk exports for the company. After the surrender, the surviving Portuguese garrison did not vanish from the Gulf. They withdrew to Muscat on the Omani coast, a fortified harbour that became their new headquarters. From its walls, Portugal still policed shipping lanes and collected what tolls it could. But the customs house that once fattened Lisbon's treasury now belonged to Persia and its English allies. Portugal refused to accept the loss. Between 1623 and 1627, its fleets sailed against Hormuz, hoping to storm the island back from Persian and English hands. Every attempt failed. Portuguese diplomats kept negotiating as late as 1631, pressing for the island's return. Persia never gave it up. Trade did not vanish from the Gulf, it simply moved. Merchants shifted their business to a mainland harbour. The Persians renamed Bandar Abbas, Port of Abbas, honouring the Shah who had broken Hormuz. Ships that once paid toll on the island now anchored on the coast instead. Hormuz itself, stripped of commerce, slid into permanent decline. For the English East India Company, the silk deal struck with Shah Abbas promised riches. In practice, the payoff was thin. English demand for raw Persian silk stayed modest, and Persian appetite for English wool never matched the company's hopes. The agreement that helped topple Hormuz enriched London far less than its merchants had imagined. Historians still mark 1622 as a hinge point in the Indian Ocean. It marked a moment when an Asian power used European sea power to defeat a European rival. English ships had done the fighting, and from that siege onward, English naval influence in the Gulf began to eclipse Portugal's fading empire. The island of Hormuz remains much as Portuguese sailors first saw it in 1507, a bare, salt-streaked rock in Iran's Hormozgan province. The strait, it once told, remains one of the most closely watched shipping lanes on Earth. That was this story here on Errata. If you enjoy forgotten history, told accuracy first, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like, and we will keep bringing the past back to light.